Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Dropping Bars. This is Kimron Corion, and I am bringing you another exciting episode. I have an exciting guest with me today, no other than Dr. Philbert Aaron. Dr. Aaron is somebody I met maybe a couple years ago, 2 years or so ago, could be less, while I was a communications manager at the Grenada Tourism Authority. His wife, Kamala Aaron, and him, they actually did a workshop with us, with the entire marketing and communication team, because, they're communication experts. And, they had a nice session with us on storytelling and everything. And it was a fantastic session. And I felt, compelled to reach out to Dr. Aaron and invite him to come and drop some bars with you. And he agreed. So, Dr. Aaron, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, Dr. Aaron, I'm jumping right in and just ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what do you do and where you're from.
First of all, I'm very thankful for your invitation to be on Dropping Bars. I follow your episodes. I'm particularly interested because you usually discuss lessons, leadership lessons, life lessons, and I'm very interested in this. So thank you very much for having me. I have been a diplomat for a while, but let me start by telling you that I was born in the Commonwealth of Dominica, and a few years ago, I transitioned to the United States after serving as Dominica's ambassador to Venezuela under President Chavez and President Maduro. Before that, I had been an academic, a professor in the United States, and I was there an education expert, having done a PhD in education policy and leadership. Recently, I have developed a specialty in leadership, focusing on the prime ministers of the Eastern Caribbean, particularly interested in how they learn to do their jobs, how they develop on their jobs, how they last in their positions, and most importantly, what kind of impact they have on the development of their countries. So I have done this. And on the personal side, I'm a family man. I'm the husband, proud husband of Kamala, and the father of three kids, Olufemi, Kamara, and Oluchi.
So thank you so much, Dr. Aaron. And one of the things that you said, you spoke about, your experience in leadership and so. And one of the things I want to touch on is the one of the discussions that I know that's happening in the Caribbean right now is the centers on like non-traditional education. You're an educator, you just said so yourself. But there is this discussion on non-traditional education. As a matter of fact, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Timothy Antoine, who is Grenadian, very proud of him. He made a very specific, he made a speech, given address recently where he spoke about the importance of skill set, not just the formal education setting, but that there should be an equal emphasis being placed on skills. In some cases, hard skills, right? So what I want to ask you, as somebody who has a leadership consultant, you focus on education, diplomacy, policies, and so. How important do you think is this type of education to the development of the Caribbean region?
That's a great question. There's no doubt that non-traditional education, especially training in skills, there's no doubt that's very important. But first of all, let me explain non-traditional education and the issue of hard skills. Non-traditional education is defined in opposition to traditional education. And traditional education is what we know, what we are, very comfortable with. We are of this age, we were trained, we were educated in that way. And usually we define it as education in which the teacher stands in front. The expression is that the teacher is the sage on stage. He has all the knowledge, and he has 30 kids in front of him. He pours knowledge into those kids. Also, going with that form of education is usually academic knowledge. It's usually abstract knowledge. And so by opposition to that, there is non-traditional education. Non-traditional education in this case is usually you educating yourself, you pacing yourself, you not necessarily being in a room with a teacher at the same time. So the teacher might have recorded a session and you access it whenever you want to, at whatever time, in whatever place. And so there is this kind of disconnection between teacher and learner in this case. And that's what non-traditional education is. It also goes sometimes with hard skills, especially, producing things, material economic things. So very often people access those kinds of courses to prepare food, for example, or learn to wire electrically wire a house, or build a table, do carpentry. But, we have great examples in the world today of those. It would be Elon Musk, for example, the owner of Tesla Motors and now Twitter, somebody who does things, somebody who was able to build engines, build cars, and eventually built up an entire motor company. So it's people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and so forth. Now, here is the thing. The question of non-traditional education, the question of hard skills, these are not the primary questions that an education planner should start with. All right. Mm-hmm. So generally, these questions, when they're used by a private individual, it's not usually problematic. Generally, in the Caribbean, individuals, we consume education, we pay for our education, we go overseas, we do different things, we train ourselves. The question is different. What we're trying to do there is move up in society. We don't ask ourselves large macroeconomic questions. However, the question that you ask about Caribbean development assumes that the perspective is national, it's macroeconomic. And from there, the question really and the perspective are different. Here, the question of just accessing education without asking the first question, what is it for? That is a problem. So, properly speaking, from a macroeconomic perspective, from the point of view of the entire country, the first question is, what is the direction? Meaning, where are we going? What are we trying to do? Right. Generally, it is for us as a developing region, we're trying to develop economically. Concrete expressions of that are, we are trying to get all our people out of poverty in 10 years, in 15 years. So if we put it around a table, for example, we imagine a cabinet in the Eastern Caribbean or in the Caribbean. The first person to deal with that kind of issue is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister sets the direction. He says, for the next 5 years, we are going to take our people, every one of us, out of poverty. Secondly, comes at the table the Minister of Planning or the Minister of Economic Development. He answers the question, how are we going to do this? We might find that we have comparative or even absolute advantages in tourism. We have sun, we have sea, we have sand, or we have mineral wealth or forests, for example. That is the second question. Only then does the strategy of education come in. How are we going to get our people producing at the highest level or at the appropriate level in the strategy chosen to attain our goal? And here is a big deal in the Caribbean. We usually put the education question ahead of those other questions of what is our direction, what are we trying to do, and how are we going to do it. Properly speaking, non-traditional or traditional education, hard skills or soft skills, they only are a fuel, like gasoline. They're not the fire. Economic development is the fire. Economic development needs fuel. You can pour gasoline onto it. You can feed it timber, dry wood, leaves, whatever you want. But education is the fuel. Education cannot start an economic drive by itself. It needs a fire that it will speed up or blow up. So this is what we need to ask first. What are we trying to do economically? And how, in terms of economic strategy, how do we do it? Only then do economic planners come on and decide, here is what you need, here is how many people you need trained in this area, and so forth, and produces the kind of labor for that. And that is the ideal way in which it is supposed to be done.
And I like what you just said. I was speaking to a friend of mine, and they echoed a similar sentiment. They said, at the end of the day, before we start saying, okay, well, we want to invest in education, we need to know exactly in what areas, what areas do we need in the country or wherever it is, so that we could invest specifically in having people educated in those particular areas. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and you really broke it down in the way that you did. So thank you very much. And I want to look at, and I know education is one area of who you are, and also leadership is another area. And I want to look at leadership development, but sometimes, at least from my experience, and I guess when I ask you the question, you can clarify that for me. We start focusing and investing in leadership in people when they're in the workforce, right? So when you have somebody's working, you send them to a supervisory training or whatever the case is. Do you believe that in the Caribbean we are placing enough emphasis on leadership development at a young age? I mean, yes, we have young leaders, right? But is there enough emphasis being placed on leadership development at that really young age, whether it's the secondary school, the college level, before we actually get to the workplace? And if yes, why? If no, why not?
Oh, I like this question because this is a question that I've spent a lot of time on. And I spend time on this question because, as I said earlier, one of my concerns in my research on leadership, particularly of Eastern Caribbean prime ministers, is the impact on national development. So the question of, are we focusing on leadership development sufficiently is very, very close to what I do. So in short, the answer is no. We're not focusing enough on leadership development, either at an early age or at a later age. But let me break it down. Let me explain. To really understand and address this question, we need to be able to separate leader from leadership. We should be able to separate growth from development and management from leadership. And in the Caribbean, normally what goes on is that we mix management with leadership conceptually. We conflate them, we blend them together as if they were the same. We do the same thing with growth and development. So leader is very simple. The leader is the individual doing the leadership action. When we invest in that leader, make him more or make her more confident, we're doing leader development. That has some impact, but it is not the ultimate impact. Leadership is an action, is a system of action between a leader and a follower. Now we bring in the follower. We're building up that relationship, making it productive. When we invest in leadership, we are doing a much more impactful investment. Now, there is growth. You can grow your skills. That's not development. Growth is more of the same. Let's illustrate, for example, in the Caribbean. Caribbean people are familiar with agriculture and especially familiar with the coconut tree. When I say more of the same, I'm talking about, for example, the stem of the coconut tree. There are coconut trees that are 100 feet tall, meaning 99 feet or 90 feet of stem, but they do not bear fruit. That is more of the same. There are coconut trees, however, farmers especially know about dwarf nuts. A coconut tree with 5 feet of stem may bear fruit. Now, bearing fruit, that is sophistication. Development is not more of the same. It's another level. It's sophistication. So leadership development is supposed to be about that, building the relationship between leader and follower, but not just to create more of the same, but is to take production and the relationship itself to another level. Now we're talking about leadership development. And in the Caribbean, we haven't begun to use the discipline of leadership development to look at and to improve processes, especially to solve the biggest problems that we have. So let me illustrate that for you. The Caribbean has, in the last few decades, suffered a number of very important collapses. For example, cricket. A guest of yours discussed this recently, that cricket, we dominated the West Indies, the Caribbean, we dominated cricket a few decades ago. Now we don't. Here is one thing. During that process, we still sent our best cricketers or our developing cricketers where? Overseas, to our competitors, even our enemies, to train. That's a lack of leadership development. We also have a challenge. Our economy is the most dependent on tourism, but we are losing market share as a region. Where do we train our leaders in tourism? Generally, we send our leaders, even in tourism, to the places that we compete with. That is a problem of leadership development. We have, for example, invented reggae music. Jamaica has. That's the Caribbean. However, production of reggae music, much more of it is happening outside of the region, and that poses a problem of leadership development. We have other challenges. Let's take the Eastern Caribbean where we sit. The Eastern Caribbean, recently, we had a collapse of the banana industry. For about a generation, we were crying wolf. Banana is going to die. Banana is dying. We did not develop a process for preventing banana from dying or putting in swiftly a replacement. This illustrates abundantly the leadership development problem that we have in the Caribbean and especially the Eastern Caribbean. Now, it doesn't mean that there are not bright spots. There are bright spots in the region. For example, again, I focus on the Eastern Caribbean, especially Eastern Caribbean prime ministers. So here we have a model, a unique model of political system, and especially of leadership development of political leaders. Like 60 years ago, 1950s, 1960s, there were men with very little education. In Antigua, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, they created a political system in which first they created unions. Men of very little education. Later on, they created political parties. Eventually, they got control of those countries. They did not train in foreign universities or universities at all. They trained themselves on the job. That is what you were referring to. That is a great example. However, in the 60 years since then, the system of developing leaders has remained the same. Parts of it have even collapsed. For example, there used to be the role of trade unions in developing leaders. This has largely disappeared. So the model of leadership development is collapsing. And what we have here is that it impacts leadership quality tremendously. One of the biggest impacts, in addition to what I mentioned, that we are not solving our biggest problems, one of the biggest challenges is that leadership becomes a hit or miss thing. In Dominica, for example, we've had 7 prime ministers, 2 have succeeded. What it means is every 3 prime ministers, about 2 of them fail and 1 succeeds. That is very impactful negatively for a country. So this illustrates what the main thing, that we do not focus enough on leadership development, and we can do it better. There are leaders who succeed. For example, Prime Minister Skerry. He succeeded, youngest prime minister in Dominica, but the second youngest prime minister in the history of the job. Prime ministers anywhere in the world, okay, at 31.
Right.
So that is a success. He also had the highest level of support in the history of Dominica. That's a success. He has lasted the longest in Dominica. That is success. But those are largely exceptions, and most importantly, these are leadership models in which the leader largely trained himself outside of institutions, outside of universities, outside of schools. And so rightly, it cannot be claimed that that is a success for our emphasis on leadership development, because we do not focus on leadership development in the region, including our smaller region.
Thank you for breaking that down. I'm really learning a lot from you. Just sit down here listening, and I'm like, wow, I can imagine your students as an educator, right? I really like how you break it down and use examples. This is golden. Thank you for doing that. And you spoke about leadership in terms of political leadership. You spoke about your study of political leaders in the Eastern Caribbean. So, and I know that one of your many hats is you're a diplomat, and I want to kind of get a little insight on life as a diplomat. As a former ambassador to Venezuela, current as based on your recent posting, the permanent representative to the Dominica's permanent representative to the UN. What does life as a diplomat entails? Like, is it the good life?
Good question. Actually, it really the life of a diplomat brings in the both poles of what people imagine, and it is you have, on the one hand, you have the ultra prestigious assignments. On the other hand, you have much more pedestrian, much more concrete types of activities. So my first assignment, as I said earlier, I was ambassador of Dominica to Venezuela, and during that time, under the leadership of Prime Minister Skerry for Dominica, and in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, and when after the passing of Hugo Chavez, President Nicolas Maduro. To illustrate, during that period, during those 10 years, I am very happy that I contributed to maintaining the relationship of Dominica with Venezuela. And not just maintaining, but servicing on a very detailed, concrete way. That is, being in constant contact with my counterparts, being in constant contact with the country of Venezuela, constant contact with financiers, banks, ministries, and so forth. That illustrates part of the job. Also, there's the ultra prestigious part of the job that most people pay attention to. And there is that. For example, I can see that I have had access to and worked in the presidential palaces of Bolivia, of Cuba, of Honduras, Nicaragua, Venezuela. These are, very, prestigious places. However, the function of an ambassador at the most simplistic level, is carrying messages. Sometimes it's a physical message. Sometimes you deliver a letter. Sometimes it's word of mouth. However, at a more sophisticated level, it involves reporting as well as advising and representing. So representation can be as simple as attending an event, for example, in Venezuela, in which you say nothing, but your presence says a lot. You don't use words, but your presence tells the people of Venezuela, the government of Venezuela, that you have a friend in Dominica. It might be a sad event. You're there to express grief, to give condolence. Sometimes you lay a wreath. Non-verbal actions, but these are very, very, very meaningful. You are showing the people of that country that you support them. They have a friend. You care for their well-being. At other times, you're negotiating. It's much more complex, many more procedures, and so forth. And so that's the life of a diplomat. And I'm very happy that I have been able to really get in the weeds in the relationship between these two countries, because these countries and all countries have diplomatic relationships because they have interests. And
Right.
two mountains don't meet. And very often, two countries don't meet, especially our islands that are separated, that are surrounded by water. And I, as ambassador, I, as diplomat, I serve as the bridge between these two peoples, these two countries. And, make sure that there is understanding. In the reporting, for example, I report to Venezuela. We've had a hurricane. Here is the situation. Here is exactly what the situation looks like. Here is how many people perished, unfortunately. Here, how many people are injured. Here is what happened to our hospitals, to our roads, and so forth. And I do the inverse. I do the same thing for Dominica when it's relating to Venezuela. I inform the Prime Minister, advise him of the situation in Venezuela. Here is what's going on. Here is what's not going on. So this is in sum the life of a diplomat, especially as head of mission, the life of an ambassador, reporting, advising, representing, but basically is serving as a bridge, a human bridge between those two large entities, those two distant entities, abstract entities. That's the job.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I've always wondered, what it was like, and you definitely clarified it. And I imagine in your years of whether it's as an ambassador, or as a professor, whatever it is, that there must have been some obstacles that you faced along the way as you execute your duties, whatever those duties were. Are there any obstacles that you face that you want to share now, and maybe share how you overcome them?
Absolutely. I wasn't born into a diplomatic service. I wasn't promised onto that. It wasn't promised to me. As a matter of fact, growing up as a young person in Dominica, I actually understood that diplomacy, being an ambassador, was the task, the job of certain well-placed individuals at the time with certain powerful names. My last name, Aaron, is a very humble name. I come from a poor family. My parents, two parents, fortunately, with 7 kids, 5 boys, 2 girls, and my dad, raised that family on tilling a piece of land that wasn't his at first, squatting on mountainsides, walking miles to get to that piece of land. And the only other job he had, well, he was also a fisherman. And when I say fisherman, I'm not talking about a guy with a fleet of, a fiberglass ships that he goes out and catches big fish. No, my father was a coastwise fisherman using Native American-style canoes to fish and to catch small fish, sprats. In Creole in Dominica, we call that chacha. We even add small in front of it, chacha, right? And we small fries. We call people that when we want to denigrate them. So my father was that. That's what he did. And once a week, he was a stevedore tossing bananas into the holds of ships that took bananas to England. My mother was a seamstress, a farmer also, and a seamstress. But here is what. I've seen that you've written about having a side hustle, selling tambourine balls, at least,
yes.
During a period of your life. Well, my mom had several side hustles. My mom would sell anything that she could make or farm. So she sold, coconut cakes. That would be the equivalent to your the coconut version of tambourine ball. She sold lettuce. She sold cucumbers. She sold tomatoes, coconut cakes. So many things that she did. So she hustled, and I learned from her that hustle. And so in high school, I had a side hustle. I lived on the port of Portsmouth, big wide open bay, where tourists came, and I went after tourists, especially pleasure yachts, smaller ones, not the big, large tourist boats with thousands. And I did a side hustle of providing them with water, with ice, with fruits, taking them up the Indian River on tours, boat tours, or arranging safari tours for them around the country. And I was in high school. I was studying at the same time. So that taught me one strategy for dealing with my poverty. It also taught me something very important that, unfortunately, my family, my parents did not teach, was the purpose of life. That is something generally working class kids do not get from home. And so I, got some of that from that side hustle, and it gave me a sense of discipline. I had one major challenge in my life was that I could not sit still. I did so much physical activity, walking around, getting fruits, doing business, roaming the forest, swimming in the sea, that I did not have the self-discipline of being able to sit. Well, here's something. If you can't sit, if you can't be still, if you can't open your ears and shut your mouth, you can't learn from school. And so I had that as an early challenge. Unfortunately, from this activity, I was able slowly, with the help of others, but slowly from that example of hustle and doing my own hustle to give myself a purpose in life and to discipline my body. I would actually force myself to stay in our yard at least throughout the weekend. When I started training myself to sit and to listen and to learn and to read, I would actually do that. Force myself not to roam for miles, but to sit around the house and the yard and build up that discipline. That's how I started digging myself out of that hole that I was in.
And I imagine that along the way that you learn some valuable lessons, some valuable life lessons. What are like 3 lessons that you learned along the way that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to share those. First of all, it's interest. You need to find an interest. Some people call it a passion, but you need to find an interest. You need to find a passion, something you like doing. Now let me quickly say this. There's a lot about passion in personal development. You're on LinkedIn, you see that. You hear that all the time. Yes. Just do something you like and you're bound to succeed. That is not true. Passion alone gets you nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. So once you have a passion, okay, that gives you some direction, you need to be able to commit to that thing. You must commit to it. You have to be all in. You have to not spare energy or time. You have to give it everything you have. But there is also a critical part that I don't think we emphasize enough, especially in personal development circles in the Caribbean. It is testing your capacity for the thing you like. We say this around certain communities in the Caribbean. You may like math, but math may not like you back. So it does not end on having a passion. It does not end with having interest. You need to find an interest. You need to commit yourself to developing that interest wherever it leads. And you need to be really realistic about it. You need to test your capacity for it. And this happened in my life, but it is also emerging in my research. Again, my research subject Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt has shown that. He had great passion for politics very early. But when I met him at the Dominica Grammar School, he did those two other things. He had already committed to two things. He was not sure whether he would be a politician or a lawyer. But at the Dominica Grammar School, he tested his capacity for leadership. He got himself elected head boy, and there he practiced politics at the school level. And already there, you can see him taking on certain practices and doing things in a certain way that you will see later on in life. So these are three tested lessons. Find a passion, commit to it, but keep it real. Find out if you're good at it or if you're not. If you're not, find another thing. Find something that will reward you with the time that you put into it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because too many times we have people saying, just follow your passion, follow your passion. And to me, it's a bit misguided. And so I'm really happy that you broke that down. So, Dr. Aaron, and we're also about to enter a new year. We're about to end the 2022, enter 2023. Now we have some young people that pay attention to dropping bars. What is, what encouragement you can leave with young people across the Caribbean region as they're about to enter, as we're about to enter a new year, 2023?
But here's what I'll say. You are in a region of excellence. The Caribbean is a region of excellence. We have achieved excellence in many things, in cricket, in music, in sports, in business. So I would urge people, not just young people, everybody, but including young people, I would urge them to pay attention to the success stories in your culture, in your region. Pay attention to those stories. For example, we have, I always mention the example of excellence of Prime Minister Skerritt, because at 31, where generally young men in the Caribbean are paying attention to other things, he was already top in his job leading a country. But apart from that, there are others. I pay attention to Rihanna, for example. This girl from Barbados, who started out with music, traditional, we do music. However, she went on to completely disrupt the beauty industry. Did it globally, so much so that before age 35, she has made herself $1 billion. So yes. Look at the success stories. We have a lot of them. There's the success story of Bob Marley. There's the success story of gold medal winner Kirani James of Grenada. There is, of course, Usain Bolt. But we have in different areas also. We have a Nobel Prize in Economics from St. Lucia. Sir Arthur Lewis. That is a global level of success. Again, from St. Lucia, we have a Nobel Prize in Literature, poet, playwright, Derek. And we have also in Trinidad, we have V.S. Naipaul. So we do have those success stories. I'm urging Caribbean people, especially youth, to pay attention to the success stories and to go for success. Do not compromise. Excellence is possible. It's there in those examples that I mentioned and more. So give it your all. We generally talk about, I'm trying a thing. I'm seeing whether it will work. Let's get away from that. You have to commit. You have to give it your all. You have to be all in. You have to not back down. You have to go after your success. You have to pursue excellence. It's in our culture, and you can do it.
Absolutely. Wow, what a way to wrap up. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Aaron, I mean, this was fantastic. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for dropping those awesome bars with us. I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate your time. I know it's the holidays, so I mean, it's even more appreciative of you coming on and just dropping those bars with us. So thank you everybody for tuning in to another week, another episode of Dropping Bars. We were speaking with Dr. Philbert Aaron, and Dr. Aaron, thank you again for coming on Dropping Bars.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kimron.
Absolutely. So, guys, see you next week when we will have another episode for you of Dropping Bars with another special guest. See you next week.